the topic that was given to me, again, as you guys heard, is on the councils, which is kind of general. So I decided to tackle it by simply speaking about the very notion of what it means to come into council. So our topic is going to be on conciliarity as a whole. What does it mean to come into council? What does a council mean? Is it something that the church just made up hundreds of years after Christ? Or is it something that even cropped up in the New Testament? Or does it have an even more ancient origin than that? So the goal of this presentation is to show you why the Orthodox understanding of coming into council, why the church comes into council, is something that stems from the scripture beginning in the Old Testament. So we're going to first start by looking at the Old Testament, then we're going to go to the New, and then we're going to go to the early church. So specifically here, when I mean council, I'm not talking about parish council or things like that. I'm specifically talking about councils which are convened for the purpose of making a ruling on important issues. So a typical example, for instance, is the synod, right? In the Coptic Orthodox Church, there's a synod that convenes of bishops. They make a ruling on something. That ruling is binding on everyone that is in the church, right? Why is that the case? Where did we get that idea, right? And this is not just a Coptic only, right? This is an Orthodox, a universal thing. All Orthodox churches come into council. All Orthodox churches believe that those councils are binding on the people underneath the bishopric of all those members who are part of the council. So the goal is to show you the scriptural basis of that, starting from the Old Testament. Okay, so I hope that's very clear. So where we're going to first start with is by talking about this idea of the elder in the Old Testament. So the word zaken, or zakenim in the plural, is a Hebrew word that means an elder, or it means an older man. And it is used in the Old Testament, especially in Genesis and Exodus, to refer to the patriarch of a clan. When I say patriarch, I don't mean it in the Christian or the clerical sense. I mean as in the head of the family, the male head of the family. So in the Old Testament, especially in Genesis and Exodus, you have these clans, these extended families. There's a mom and dad, there's the aunts and uncles, right? There's a big happy family. At the head of that family is going to be the grandpa or the great-grandpa, who's the patriarch. And so he's going to be identified as the zaken, or the elder. And what we see in the Bible is that prior to the Levitical priesthood, so we know that when the Mosaic covenant, when God gives the law to Moses on Sinai, he gives a priesthood, right, to the Levites. They're the ones that are responsible for the sacrifice, etc. Before all that, it was the zaken, or the elder, that was responsible for offering the sacrifice on behalf of the family. So each clan, each family has an elder. The elder offers sacrifice on behalf of them. And so an example is Abraham. Abraham offers sacrifice. Isaac offers sacrifice. Jacob offers sacrifice. Even amongst the Gentiles, Job, for instance, Job is I don't know if you guys knew this, but he's a Gentile. Because he's not under the Levitical priesthood, because he doesn't follow the law of Moses, he continues to offer sacrifice because he's the head of his family. Okay? So they are the elders, right? They have this kind of authority over their family. And what we see is that in Numbers chapter 11, verse 16 to 17, Moses gives a specific power to the elders. And this is what it says. Again, if you guys have your Bibles out on your phone or something like that, you can read alongside me. Numbers 11, verse 16 to 17. So the Lord said to Moses, "Gather to me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people and officers over them. Bring them to the tabernacle of meeting, that they may stand there with you. Then I will come down and talk with you there. I will take of the spirit that is upon you, and will put the same upon them, and they shall bear the burden of the people with you, that you may not bear it yourself alone." So the idea is Moses is the leader of Israel, and God is saying, you can't do this by yourself. So you find the elders, these heads of all these clans in Israel, round them up, and the spirit that's in you, meaning the Holy Spirit that's energizing Moses to be the leader of Israel, he's going to take a portion of that and put it where? On them. So that now the leadership and the authority rests not on Moses alone, but on who? On all the elders together. Okay? So this is what we see in Numbers chapter 11, verse 16 to 17. And then later on, when you read the book of Deuteronomy, and also Leviticus, but really specifically Deuteronomy, because Deuteronomy is is fixated on matters concerning the people, matters of the city, it tells you every single time there has to be a dispute settled, or there has to be some kind of punishment doled out, or there has to be some kind of ruling, that it has to be brought to the elders. So for instance, in Deuteronomy chapter 12, the elders of a city shall send and take him from there and deliver him into the hand of the avenger of blood. This is talking about a person who's found guilty of premeditated murder. So who's the one that rules against the man? The elders. Deuteronomy chapter 21, your elders and judges shall come out and measure the distance. It's talking about in a homicide case, the elders are the ones who rule. If it was a murder, they'd rule who is going to be suspect, who's not, right? The elders do that. In Deuteronomy chapter 21, the same chapter, verse 18 to 19, a rebellious son is brought to the elders of his city at the gate. So this is talking about in the case of there's a son who will not obey his father and mother, and the father and mother have disciplined and chastened him, and he is still unrepentant in his rebellion. It says that they are to take him out to the elders of the city, and then of course if he doesn't listen to them, then a punishment is going to be given. Okay? So this is so on and so forth. There's a myriad of other verses I could bring up to show you the position the elders have as judges or officers in Hebrew society. Does that make sense to everyone? On the other hand, you also have the Hebrew word Kohen. And the word Kohen means priest. This is a very, I don't know if it's the same in Arabic, but at least in Giz and in Amharic in Ethiopia, we use the same word to mean priest. Is that the case or no? Okay, so related somewhat, right? And the word Kohen in Hebrew means a ritual priest who is responsible for the sacrificial work. So I told you how prior to the Levitical priesthood, the elders did everything, right? They sacrificed for the family, they judged the family. By the time we get to Moses, the elders are only judging. The sacrificing part is given to the Levites. So the Levites are the ones who are called the Kohen. And they also have a role to play in terms of the judgment and the ruling of Israel. So in Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 10, it says, the Levites shall teach Jacob, and Jacob here is used as a synonym for Israel. They shall teach Jacob your judgments and Israel your law. So the Kohen in particular are tasked with making his judgment or rulings alongside the judges from the elders. So there's the Zakim we talked about, right? And then alongside them, the Kohen are responsible. And particularly their job is to interpret the law. So the Levites, the Kohen, the priests, are the ones that are in charge of the law. The law meaning the books of the law, the Torah. So just as a sidebar here, right? When you have sola scriptura, our issue is not on the grounds of a New Testament or of an early church. We can take it even back even earlier, which is the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, the book of the law, the Torah, was never meant for any person to interpret as they so choose. It was kept at the tabernacle. It was defended by the Levites. In fact, in Malachi, it says that it is from the lips of the priest that a person should hear the law. So they're the ones that are given the power to interpret the law, to interpret what was basically their Bible. Because at that time, the only books of the Bible there was the 5 books. So the Orthodox Church continues that tradition, where do you find the interpretation of the scriptures? Where do you find the ruling of the scriptures? In the church, with the priesthood of God. Okay? So in an instance of where we see the judging being relegated to the priests alongside the elders is in Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 16 to 18, where it says, if a false witness rises against any man to testify against him of wrongdoing, then both men in the controversy shall stand before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who serve in those days, and the judges shall make careful inquiry. So the priests, the Kohanim, and the judges who are the elders, the Zakenim, come together and they have to make an inquiry. Notice also here in this passage that it says, they shall stand before the Lord. Now, can the Lord be physically located? Does he have a body at this point? Is this post-incarnation? Not at all. But it says here that he shall stand before the Lord, comma, and in the next clause, before the priests and the judges. So the person who wants to stand before the Lord, who must he stand before? The priests and the judges. Please keep that in the back of your head when we get to the New Testament. And Christ says concerning the apostles, whoever hears you hears me, whoever rejects you rejects me. They're related, okay? And another similar verse is found in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 8 to 12, where it talks about a ruling being given to the priests and to the elders together. Okay. Let me give a direct example from the Bible itself of this idea of interpreting the words of God for the people. So in Exodus chapter 13, verse 1, and I encourage you to read both 12 and 13 for full context, because it's God basically telling Moses how to offer the Passover and also how to offer the firstborn of Israel. So in verse 1, it says, God tells Moses this, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses saying, consecrate to me all the firstborn, whatever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and beast, it is mine." When you skip 10 verses later, and Moses has heard the words of the Lord, and now he's going to stand in front of Israel, Moses says this. He says, "You shall set apart to the Lord all that opens the womb, that is every firstborn that comes from an animal which you have. The male shall be the Lord's. But every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb, and if you will not redeem it, then you shall break its neck." Now, I ask you a question. Did God tell Moses that in verse 1? He did not. He said, whatever opens the womb among the children of Israel is mine. But Moses comes, takes the word of the Lord, and he applies it. In this specific case, the reason why he's applying it is because the question arises, what if there is an unclean animal? Do we sacrifice an unclean animal to God? Because the donkey, as you all know, according to the Levitical rules and regulation, it's like a pig, right? It's unclean. So what do you do then? They're asking Moses. So Moses is taking the words of the Lord, and because God gave him not just a book, but an authority to apply the book, what does Moses say? He says, in the case of the donkey, then you can redeem it with a lamb in its place, or you can just break its neck. So this is a explicit example of the authority to rule that, right, and to apply that God gives to the elders, right? Again, in the sola scriptura paradigm, we have to read what was in verse 1 literally, whatever opens the womb, including donkeys. But it's not just we don't believe in a perspicuous or a straightforward reading of any text. A text is understood as applied by the ones that are given charge of the text. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay, cool. And so in relation to this, what we see is, and this is a word that even to this day, Rabbinical Judaism uses, but you also find it in Second Temple Judaism, which is the word halakha or halakha, which means it comes from the Hebrew word to walk. And it's a reference to Jewish law as applied by Jewish authorities. And it's a reference to the fact that the ruling of the Jewish authorities, of these priests and elders, is so specific and minute that it should rule over even the way you walk. How you walk should be under the obedience of the people who rule over you. So an example of this is in 2 Chronicles chapter 17, verse 7 to 9, where it says, when the righteous king Jehoshaphat, so this is way after Moses, it says, also in the 3rd year of his reign, he sent his leaders, Ben-Hail, Obadiah, Zechariah, it's a list of names, to teach in the cities of Judah. And with them he sent Levites, Shemaiah, Nathaniah, Zebediah, Ashahel, etc., etc., etc. And with them Elishama and Jehoram, the priests. So they taught in Judah and had the book of the law of the Lord with them. They went throughout all the cities of Judah and taught the people. So this righteous king Jehoshaphat is trying to bring Israel back from idolatry. They'd gone through a dark season of idolatry. How does he bring them back? He sends a number of judges, these leaders, the elders, and alongside with them who? The priests. And they go into each city, and it said that they had the book of the law of the Lord. That's the Hebrew Bible, right? The Torah. And they teach accordingly. So this is an example. Another example is also in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 8 to 12. It says, if a matter arises which is too hard for you to judge, between degrees of guilt for bloodshed, between one judgment or another, or between one punishment or another, matters of controversy within your gates, you shall arise and go up to the place which the Lord your God chooses. You shall come to the priests, the Levites, and to the judges there in those days, and inquire of them, and they shall pronounce upon you the sentence of judgment. You shall do according to the sentence which they pronounce upon you in that place which the Lord chooses. And you shall be careful to do according to all that they order you, according to the sentence of the law in which they instruct you, according to the judgment which they tell you, you shall do. And then this is a really important part. You shall not turn aside to the right hand or to the left from the sentence which they pronounce upon you. So God is saying you have to be so specific in following what they tell you to do. You can't even walk a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left. There's no leeway. We follow to the word that ruling that the elders and the priests have given to us. And it says, now the man who acts presumptuously and will not heed the priest who stands to minister there before the Lord your God or the judge, that man shall die, so you shall put away the evil from Israel. So this is this idea where the instruction of the elders and the judges that come together upon the people instructs them in the manner in which they have to walk. Now, another important thing that I want to touch here, we're touching on different components, as you can see. Another important thing that we have to talk about is this idea of the laying on of hands. The Hebrew word there is smikah, the laying on of hands. So I told you way back that God takes us the spirit that's in Moses, and I talked about that. Now the question is, did that end or die with those original elders, that authority? No, it didn't. It continued on to the next generation. How did it continue on to the next generation? It did so by the laying on of hands. So an example of this is in Numbers chapter 27, verse 8 to 21. Maybe someone can read this so I can take a break and take a sip of water. So what? Shut the mic. Right. Totally nice and loud.
Take Joshua the son of Nun with you, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him, and set him before Eleazar the priest, and before all the congregation, and inaugurated him in their sight. And you shall give some of your authority to him, that all the congregation of the children of Israel may be obedient. He shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire before the Lord for him by the judgment of the Urim. At his word they shall go out, and at his word they shall come in, and he and all the children of Israel with him.
All right, perfect. So Joshua is going to be this appointed successor of Moses. How is that succession enabled? There's a laying on of hands, right? You can even see in the picture. Moses puts his hands on Joshua, and then God, through that medium which God himself has prescribed, will take the authority of Moses, put it on Joshua. And then remember what we talked about in the earlier slide, this idea of the walking, the instruction of walking. That authority now is on Joshua. So it says, at his word they shall go out, at his word they shall come in. So which direction you walk is directed by who now? Joshua. Succession, right? And that's going to continue on after Joshua dies, right? The laying on of hands continues. That's why we can talk about Jehoshaphat and the Levites and the judges at that time, which is like, depends on how you date the scriptures, but at least 1,000 years, right? Give or take, after this. So thousands of years of succession and authority going from father to son. Not hereditarily, but you get the point, right? In some cases it can be, especially in the Old Testament. So from here, we get a lot of different components. We get the idea of the elder and the priest. We get the idea of the application of the book, of the Bible, being their charge and their authority, their ability to pronounce sentence and judgment, and that this authority can pass from generation to generation. Okay? This is all found without us even touching a page of the New Testament. This is Old Testament.